think of college football rivalries, who comes to mind? Army-Navy, Florida-Georgia, Michigan-Ohio State? How about Princeton-Rutgers? It rings a vague bell, doesn't it? Maybe that's because they played the first football game ever back in 1869, arguably the genesis of college sports as an organized and, yes, very lucrative endeavor. Princeton-Rutgers turned out to be a storied rivalry, the two schools playing each other 71 times, Princeton dominating the matchup with a 53-17-1 record. But then in 1980, the rivalry stops, rather abruptly, never to resume again. So what happened? Why did the rivals a mere 20 miles apart stop playing each other in football and end a tradition that dated back over 100 years? I think I know the answer, and it has something to do with statistics, namely the most decisive one of all, points for versus points against. In the last 5 games the two teams ever played, Rutgers outscored Princeton 129-33. The Scarlet Knights essentially crowned King of New Jersey. For Princeton, it was one thing to lose to Rutgers, quite another to have to go to Piscataway to do it. Its Tiger pride at stake, the university parted ways with the pigskin posers and, nestled in its Gothic halls and cloisters, took heart in the fact that it could still beat Harvard and Yale. According to my analysis, one single year, one single game, one single quarter even, defined the dissolution of this rivalry. I will draw on photos, written accounts, memories of eyewitnesses, including myself, and pinpoint how it all started to unravel on September 28, 1974. It was a time of great upheaval. President Nixon had just resigned, and the Vietnam War was limping to an inglorious end. It was also the start of Princeton's football season. They were hosting Rutgers in the old Palmer Stadium before 26,000 fans, including myself. I was 10 years old, a big fan of quarterback Norm Snead and the New York Giants, and about to be more astonished at what I saw than when Evel Knievel launched himself over the Snake River Canyon in a rocket. How that game ended would have made national news had not Nolan Ryan pitched his 3rd career no-hitter on the same day. It might even still be talked about today had it been between, say, Notre Dame and Miami. But remember that record I cited, the 53-17-1? This is the story of that one tie, a 6-6 stalemate that Princeton should have easily won with a PAT in the closing seconds had there been goalposts through which to kick the ball. Unbelievably, and much to Princeton's chagrin, Rutgers fans had torn them both down. How did this happen? Recall that the tradition is for the home team to tear down the goalposts in celebration, almost a conditioned reflex for upsets or last-second scores. Completely unheard of is when the visitors do it, especially both goalposts during the course of the game with neither security nor the home team lifting a finger to stop them. Now, I was at the game, and this video would be very easy to make had I the gift of total recall and could simply describe what happened. But my memory is so dim, so fuzzy, so clouded by the lapse of 50 years that I had to rummage through the internet, that grab bag of information, to see if I could pull out enough facts to explain what happened. That balmy day in 1974, the stakes could not have been higher. Bragging rights for the best college football team in New Jersey. Rutgers had a new coach, Frank Burns, and no, he was not also the stuffy surgeon on MASH, while Princeton was trying to rebound from its worst season ever, 1973, when it went 1-8 and lost not only to Rutgers, but to every team in the Ivy League, even the Dartmouth Big Green, even bigger with its novel way of stacking the defense, only beating Colgate. If the Tigers were going to claw their way back into contention, they'd have to go through their so-called Route 1 rivals with the Big Ten aspirations. Once the ball was kicked off, the game could not have been closer. Both teams held scoreless in the first half, Princeton neutralizing both Rutgers' offense and its place kicker, Bill Bradley. No, not that Bill Bradley. Somebody else with the same name, sidelined with torn ligaments. When Rutgers finally did score, a substitute kicker tried the extra point and shanked it wide to keep the score 6-0. This lasted deep into the fourth quarter, Rutgers massaging the lead and holding Princeton firmly at bay. Finally, in the closing minutes, the Tigers went to work, methodically marching downfield, knowing they could win it with a touchdown. If report can be trusted, this was the point at which the Rutgers fans were so riled, either with beer or their hatred of Princeton, or both, that they set upon the goalposts and tore them down, melting back into the crowd with a few flimsy timbers as souvenirs, a feat, incidentally, that would anticipate 1976 when Rutgers students tricked campus security into thinking they were landscapers and tried to steal the cannon from Cannon Green. Here is the one photo I unearthed of the goalposts being torn down, and by the disheveled look of the students, their heady impulses, the grasping and clutching and lifting of wooden posts, it could easily be confused with a casting call for Jesus Christ Superstar. Victory hung in the balance. 3rd and 1, from the 1, with less than a minute to go, Princeton went to its big back, Walt Snickenberger, who bowled his way in for the game-tying touchdown. In the absence of goalposts, Princeton appealed to the referees, suggesting temporary ones stored under the stadium be set up, or, barring that, have the game moved to the practice field in front of Jadwin Gym. Even the cheerleaders got involved, placing their megaphones where the posts were, offering them as substitute posts. The referees nixed all 3 options and ruled that Princeton had to go for the 2-point conversion, the failure of which so embittered the relationship between the two schools that a final rupture 6 years later was all but inevitable. Without belaboring what happened that day, I'm going to show you 2 different online sources that describe the incident with only the flimsiest of facts, neither of which agree. The university's own Tiger blog says that with 2:31 left, Rutgers fans stormed the field and tore down one of the goalposts. Then, one play later, they took down the other. No explanation of how they ran 100 yards in the course of a single play and regrouped for the next assault. Perhaps they just sprinted down the old cinder track, screened from security by the Rutgers players, the 2 groups working in concert. The Rutgers Athletics Tailgating Club, that bastion of Scarlet Knights sociability, calls it a little differently. They say thousands of Rutgers fans who had torn down one set of goalposts earlier in the game reemerged from the stands after the touchdown was scored and took down the other set. And that's kind of what I remember. Princeton scoring, the Rutgers fans realizing that an extra point will win the game and springing back into action, just like they did before, meeting with virtually no resistance, not even from an exhausted Tiger mascot. Wouldn't it be great if people who were at the game, aside from myself, bore witness on camera to what they saw? That would clear things up, you think? Well, my diligence paid off, and I have 2 alumni from each school on film describing the mayhem of those final moments. Here is Tony Pollock, who scored Rutgers' only touchdown that day, recounting his exploit as humorously as you can imagine, and then rather disingenuously, from my point of view, referring to what happened at the end.
One of the most important plays, I guess, or most famous plays at Rutgers is as a punt return. It was a 94-yard punt return against Princeton in 1974, and I was returning punts, and we were playing Princeton, and it was a 0-0 game, 0-0 late in the third quarter, and I'm returning punts. And the rule on punts is if you stand on a 10-yard line when you're back to your goal line, and if you have to take more than 2 steps back, you kind of fair catch, wave your hand like you're going to fair catch it, and let it go back in the end zone. Well, I figured it's a 0-0 game. Might as well take a chance on something. And I'm looking up and find the ball, and all I remember was the sky was really gray that day. So I got a good look at the ball, and I started looking back down at the Princeton guys coming downfield. And I said, "Wow, they're slow. There's nobody coming down." And I'm taking another step back and another step back and another step back, and I'm saying, well, I'm probably not supposed to do this, but I catch the ball and you know, not supposed to do this, but take off, break a couple tackles, and go 94 yards for a touchdown. Well, That's cool. The next thing I know, Jimmy O'Halloran's picking me up, and we got a 6-0 lead. What I find out later, after I get back after the game, was I'm Bert Kossip, who was a quarterback on that team, and he would be next to Coach Burns every time there was a punt return and we would get possession of the ball. And he'd be next to Coach Burns waiting for the play. Coach Brands was up in the booth. Coach Brands would say, okay, based on the field position we have, he'd tell Bert what play to run. Well, find out, again, at the frat house that as the ball's coming down, Bert's standing next to Coach Burns, and Coach Burns is yelling. He's yelling, no, no, no. And Tony, don't catch that one. Let it go in the end zone. And then as soon as I catch the ball and break a couple of tackles, there's Coach Burns yelling, go, go, go. And all of a sudden, breaking the clear, and we score 6, and it was a crazy game. And because at the end of the game, our fans and the Princeton fans, who knows, tore down both goalposts, and the game ended up in a 6-6 tie.
For a Princeton perspective, here is Bill Caton Narval of the great Princeton class of 1976, whom I randomly found during halftime of this year's Yale game, staring out at the field as if conjuring up ghosts of a distant past, with enough white hair and striped orange ensemble to make me surmise he was at the game. And boy, were my instincts right. He was and affably obliged my request to tell me what he saw.
Remember it.
Who are you? What's your name?
I'm Bill Caton Norvell of the great Princeton class of 1976.
Okay.
I was here in 1974 for the last Princeton-Rutgers football game.
Yes.
Which sadly did not end in a tie. Rutgers had scored early and was up 7-0 as the time was expiring. Princeton scored a touchdown to make it 6-7. Would have been happy to settle for a tie.
Right.
There was very little time left. A number of Rutgers fans stormed the field and tore down both goalposts. At the far end, I think it was a pretty large crowd. At the other end, it was a much smaller group. But both goalposts came down, because Princeton was the home team and responsible for maintaining the field. Right. The ruling was that they had to go for 2 because there were no goalposts and they could not pick it. They went for 2 and failed. Yeah. And so thus Rutgers won the last football game 7-6. As I said, Princeton would have walked away with a tie and felt like it was a victory.
Yes. So did they tear them down at the same time, like go from one end and run down to the other, please?
Groups. It was two different groups. They went down. They didn't go down simultaneously, but it was 2 different groups at each end of the field.
How come?
This had been almost 100.
Why do you think nobody stopped them from tearing down the goalposts?
Security was not a big deal at the games at the time. It wasn't something that we thought, oh my God, we have to defend. There was not a security presence. There were not officers on the field guarding the goalpost by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. Were you tempted to run out there and stop them yourself?
At this point, I was up in the stands. By the time I got down there, they were down.
Yeah.
It did not take. They came down surprisingly easily. I would have thought it was hard to take down goalposts.
Very good. I appreciate you doing that. Anything more you want to add?
No, I'm still proud of Princeton football, but it's a different game now.
So there you have it. A watershed moment in the history of Princeton football, still cloaked in a kind of myth, the way any great event should be. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you're a big fan of Tiger football like I am, the next time you walk down Prospect Street, take a moment to stop in front of Campus Club and look up at the tiny ornament that graces its facade. Put there in 1909, even before the heyday of Hobie Baker, it bears witness to just how obsessively Princeton regarded its football culture, a mere 3 years after the forward pass was ruled legal. And after you've pondered this artifact, lift your thoughts up to a sun-drenched heaven and think back to the glory days of Palmer Stadium, opened in 1914, demolished in 1997, and raise a glass to its memory and those who played for Princeton in 1974 and who are no longer with us. As they say, a toast to those who are gone. Quarterback Ron Biebel, halfback Walt Snickenberger, and coach Bob Cassiola.